Hello, Tightropers. At the end of this episode, we discovered from David Ostler that he will be at Benchmark Books this Wednesday, September 18th, from 5:30 p.m. to 8 p.m., selling copies of the book Bridges and signing them as well. So if you'd like to head over to Benchmark Books, it's on 3269 Main Street, Suite 250. You can head over that way between 5:30 and 8, and you will see David Ostler signing his book Bridges, Ministering to Those Who Question, which is what you are about to hear this podcast center around. We're excited for David to be in town, so we're actually going to be having a little giveaway, and we talk about it a little bit later. But if you would like to possibly receive one of 5 signed copies of the book, courtesy of Marriage on a Tightrope, head over to our Facebook group, and you'll see a thread there where you can throw your name down or just say, "I want one, please." And we're going to give away 5 books at random to people that do that. Or you can email us at Marriage on a Tightrope as well, and we'll enter you into that as well. We'll pick the winners for that before Wednesday so that David could sign your book personally right there at the bookstore. Thanks so much, and enjoy this episode with David Ostler. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Marriage on a Tightrope. This is Alan.
And this is Katie, and we're still married.
We have a special treat for everyone today. We're not alone. We are joined by philanthropist, author, media magnate. I'm just kidding. We'll let him speak for himself, but we're very, very honored and very excited to have David Ostler on the podcast. David, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Katie and Alan. It's good to be here.
David and I, you and I connected, I don't even remember which group it was in, but we ran across each other in one of the little Facebook groups we're in, and we talked a number of months ago, and you told us about your book, Bridges, that was coming out, and I thought, hey, that's kind of cool. I wonder, we'll see if it can scratch the itch of how it's going to end up, but you'll hear, Katie and I, we both have read the book, and you'll hear our thoughts, but we want to hear a little bit about your background, and we're just so excited to dig into not just the book, but also get to know you a little bit.
Well, thanks. I actually think I'm kind of boring, so when you kind of put all these superlatives out there, I kind of look over my shoulder to see who else is joining the show.
Right. We'll set you up for a bunch of high points of, hey, listeners, when David gets into that one story from his 20s, oh my gosh, you guys, it's such you gotta come up with something. I don't know.
Well, I'm kind of old enough that I don't really remember my 20s.
Well, then that means it was a really fun decade.
Well, Alan and Katie, I'm a pretty traditional Latter-day Saint. I grew up in Salt Lake City and did kind of all the basic youth activities in the church. I was in a ward where it was an Eagle Scout mill, and somehow or other I got my Eagle Scout without really doing anything other than showing up. And so much of my youth was that way, just normal, going to seminary, going on a mission. I went to southern Japan on my mission. It was wonderful. It was hard. It was, taught me a love of a people that I really didn't know up until then. Came back home and started dating. I did some dating before my mission, but met a wonderful woman. Her name's Rochelle, and we married maybe about a year and a half after I came back from my mission. And we've had a wonderful life together. I finished up a degree at the University of Utah, and then my wife and I moved out of state. We moved to New Hampshire, and I went to Dartmouth College for an MBA. And we really raised our family in the New England area, a little bit in Boston, but mainly up in New Hampshire. Mm. And we've got 6 wonderful children. We raised 2 foster kids that are also wonderful. Kind of settled into life in a normal way, got a job, and the area that I studied was, at least undergraduate, was an area called epidemiology, which is really the use of data in healthcare, and crafted a career in using data to find better ways to deliver healthcare, whether it's the actual clinical care or the business processes associated with healthcare, and developed really a 30-year career in there, which I retired from about 8 or so years ago. In my business, we moved around a bit. We did raise our family in New Hampshire, but we also lived in Salt Lake for a brief period of time, in Minnesota. And then I retired when I was working in London. So, that's kind of the personal side. We live now in Washington, D.C. 5 of our children live nearby. It seems like 5 of the children actually live with us at times while we're here. And, our youngest is 26, so we don't have small kids anymore, but we have big kids, and, it's fun. Yeah, we just blessed my granddaughter Emma today.
Oh, wow. Congrats.
She's our 6th grandchild, and she's just a doll. Just about 6 weeks old now. So it's really fun to be with the grandkids more. And since I don't work, I get to see them a bit.
Yeah.
What else do you like to do in you mentioned you've been retired for 8 years or so. What do you like to do in all that free time?
Quotation marks, Ellen, did the free time, right?
I'm sure you keep plenty busy.
After we retired in London, when I was in London, I worked hard, and so I wasn't home all the time. I was developing international businesses in Europe and in Asia, so I did a bit of travel. My wife didn't mind that because London is a beautiful place to be a tourist in.
Yeah.
She went everywhere and just had a great time, but I wasn't with her all that time. So after we retired, we signed up to go to India to work for a humanitarian organization. And it's just volunteer work, but we lived in southern India for about a year, helping those that are affected with leprosy. And, had a grand time. We certainly did some vacations while we were there to exotic places, but it was fun doing something shoulder to shoulder with Rochelle instead of so much of what, we would do is kind of do our separate things within a marriage.
Yeah.
But, I'd work. She'd make sure our children were fed and clothed, and together we made it work. But it was nice being just together, the two of us, and doing those kinds of things. When we were living in India, we got a call to serve as mission president and wife of Sierra Leone. I guess it's the Sierra Leone Freetown Mission, which is in Western Africa, and we went there and. That was really an amazing experience in so many ways. And in a way that we didn't even see in India, we saw poverty and challenges and, very, very humbling to live there. You certainly get a sense of what first world problems are and what third world problems are. Mm-hmm. And we were there until Ebola came. And if you remember right, back in 2014, there was a big epidemic in West Africa.
I do remember that.
Yeah.
We ended up having to close our mission and transferred all of our missionaries to different places, and my wife and I came home.
Wow.
And then we were called to go to the Hill Cumorah Visitor Center, and I was called as the director there, and we supervised the missionaries in the historic sites, the Joseph Smith Farm, the Whitmer Farm, the Grandin Building, and the Hill Cumorah itself, and served there. So we've found ways to be busy. And now we're really immersed in the lives of our kids and our grandkids.
You need to give yourself a little more credit because you said you're boring, and here you've traveled all over the world and doing sounds like some pretty amazing work with other people, and that's fantastic.
Well, we've always had a real sense of adventure in our marriage and in our family, and wanted to do fun things. To me, it's kind of commonplace because that's what we've always done, but I know a lot of people haven't kind of had that experience, and we do feel grateful to have it. And it really does change your worldview when you see 1 billion people living in India in poverty, and in Sierra Leone, where you can't talk about fasting at church of going without 2 meals, because that would be Monday's meal and Tuesday's meal. Right. In a place where people only eat 1 meal a day, and where 1 out of 12 children die before the age of 5. And so, it's pretty humbling to see those places and to know you really can have very limited impact. You can't fix it. You can work with people and develop friendships and do some modest amount of help, but in reality, these are, broad, intractable problems, and they're humbling to see and sobering to know how many people live in those sorts of conditions.
Yeah. Well, the main topic of this podcast now makes me feel like a little brat because the biggest problem we're dealing with is a crisis of faith, and which I don't want to minimize. A lot of our listeners obviously are listening because it's been very hard for them, but it certainly is good to keep in mind and be reminded of the fact that we're very blessed and lucky to have what we do have. And given the problems that we could have, this isn't the worst one that we could try to get past. So thanks for bringing perspective to the podcast.
Well, I've learned that everyone's problems are really real to them, and it'd be wrong to kind of judge, someone's problems as not being meaningful just because, it doesn't deal with.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're real to us, and we feel them, and they're important, and we can have compassion even if they're first world problems.
For sure.
So, my first question to you, why did you feel the need to write the book? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
And as you answer that, we'll say to the listener, it'll be in the show title, but the full name of the book is Bridges: Ministering to Those Who Question. We're calling it Bridges for short, but that is the full title of the book. So yeah, what brought about the book?
Yeah, so my wife and I got a calling in our stake to work with our leadership to try and understand, or to really reach out to the single members of our stake that don't attend church. And in our area, we have a single adult stake. So pretty much all of the young singles that are active would go outside of our stake. So we're really left with those young single adults that don't attend at all, and those that are older that both attend and don't attend. And in our stake, we have about 1,000 singles, and about 800 of them don't attend. And we're not in a stake without leadership. We have good leadership in all our wards, so it's not like there's not ministering brothers and sisters to reach out to these people. And we kind of felt like our calling was less to go out and try and knock on the doors of 800 people, but it was to systematically understand what's in the minds of the 800 people, where they once chose to be baptized, either as 8-year-olds or older, but they no longer feel that they want to or can or are able to attend church. And many of them don't even feel really like they're church members. So as we started doing that work, we came to understand that not all leaders or parents or just friends and relationships understand some of the issues about today that cause people to disaffiliate or cause them to not attend. And so part of our calling was to help our stake leaders and our ward leaders understand those issues. And it kind of became apparent that there's really not good material out there to systematically explain to believing members why someone could have a faith crisis or could struggle with belief or could choose to say, for the purposes that are important to me, I choose not to attend. And as we kind of compiled that, it became apparent that it could be put together in something that could be more useful in a broader sense than our stake. So I started writing the book about a year ago. And felt like it was something that really needed to be brought to members of the church.
Did you receive any pushback when you started to do things in an unorthodox way, sending out, in your book, you talk about how you send out letters asking the young adults why they left. And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we wrote a letter and sent it out to all the non-attending. We were able to get the bishops in each of the wards to identify from the list of people we were working with or trying to reach which ones attend and which ones don't attend. And so we wrote a letter. The bishops were comfortable with the letter, and it basically said, we're the Ostlers. We have been called to understand why people don't attend. We would like you to respond in any way you feel comfortable to help us understand that. We're not here to try and get you to come back to church. That wasn't the purpose of the letter. So we gave them a survey link. We gave them phone numbers. We gave them email. We set up a focus group that they could come to at particular times and tell us what were the issues. We got some very tender emails back. I remember one woman said, "Thank you for what you're doing, but I'm just not ready to tell you. I hurt too much and can't kind of express the reasons why I'm not attending." Mm-hmm. We had some that responded to our survey. It wasn't the survey that I included in the book, but it was a survey that some responded to. Some wrote some very poignant comments. And some of those I actually do use in the book. And it was interesting. The letter ended up in a Reddit Exmo thread. And so they started bombarding, readers of it started bombarding my Survey Monkey. So we started getting all sorts of interesting responses.
Wow.
You can always count on ex-Mormon subreddit to
blow it up,
to color things up a little bit.
Well, I actually spent some time on it as I was going through the book because there's really strong opinions there, and if we really want to understand the issue, you have to really understand the strong opinions, don't you? And so, I was appreciative of that. It didn't help my survey any, but it did help me understand kind of the poignant issues. Yeah. And from that, as we introduced that information to our leaders, we realized that we needed to be maybe more systematic in terms of data that we could collect that would help our leaders understand that the traditional belief of why people disaffiliate is not robust. And so we created 2 surveys, or at this point I'm kind of doing this on my own outside of the church calling. But we did a survey and got 520 responses from active ward and stake leaders. And I asked them maybe 70 questions, and they responded to me about, why do people disaffiliate? What are the big reasons? And the like. And then I also ran a similar survey in what's called a snowball setting, where people who identify as being in a faith crisis can answer many of the same questions and some others. And I tried to match them up. So, a leader would say, I'd ask the leader, what are the reasons why people leave? And many of them would say it's because they're sinning or because they've been offended or they're lazy or some of those narratives. And then I'd go to the faith crisis people and say, what are the reasons? And the reasons would be completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk about you just did. I'll tell you a little something. In the middle of my crisis, I was in the Elders Quorum presidency, and nobody in the ward knew outside of the bishop. And then one member of the stake presidency knew about everything I was going through and all the struggles I had. It was the last lesson I was to teach as an Elders Quorum presidency member. And I asked the question, in fact, I worked with the stake presidency member to get my lesson approved. I wanted to talk about why people leave the church. That was the entire lesson. And I asked the question, that's how I started it. The entire lesson was having everybody open it up for discussion on why do you think people leave the church? and about 20 to 25 people in the room. And it was all the response was what you mentioned that the leader said. It was, well, I have this friend and he just wanted to drink, so he stopped attending. My friend never really had a testimony in the first place, so once things got hard, he stopped attending. He doesn't want to come to church on Sundays anymore because his work's busy, so he stopped attending. It was always something, and it was difficult. And then I had asked 3 or 4 people from work that I knew had left the church to give me a 3 to 4 sentence explanation of why they stopped attending. And then I just read those. And sure enough, they didn't have anything to do with any of the reasons that the class had put forward. One question I wanted to ask you that I've actually thought about is it fair, someone that has left, wouldn't they not self-identify as lazy or disobedient? I'm not being cynical towards my own side of the fence, but if I'm asked the question, did you leave because you're lazy? Well, no, of course not. I didn't leave because I'm lazy. From a data perspective, how much of a kind of a self-reporting bias is there in the data?
Well, there's probably a lot, and the data isn't. I can't create some sort of statistically valid set of data here.
Right.
So the data is really kind of directionally interesting.
Yeah.
But it doesn't definitively say that X percent with a confidence interval of 5%.
Right.
And you certainly have all that same level of bias that is there. But as a part of this, I interviewed about 50 people who had been through a faith crisis, and I actually created a faith crisis focus group of 85 people. And I could just ask questions of them, and did the interviews with these 50 people that were in a faith crisis. And some had left, so they're not in a faith crisis anymore. And I just asked them these questions, and I had them tell me their stories. And everyone's individual, right? There isn't, a single answer out there. And so there are some that, are just tired and
right. Yeah.
lazy. But there's some that really struggle, and they've struggled with doctrinal or behavioral or historical issues within the church, and they create an immense amount of dissonance with them. It's very painful. It kind of completely shatters their worldview, and as you know, relationships in a marriage or with other family members, and the level of intense emotions that I was feeling from these interviews caused me to really legitimize the data that I had collected. Sure, some might be lazy. Heck, I'm a member of the church and I'm believing, and I'm lazy. It's not that simple. And even Elder Uchtdorf says, why would someone leave the church? I'm going to paraphrase this, and it's not that simple. Some people struggle for years with it and make hard decisions on this. So, but the reason why I think it's important to kind of talk about this is that if we really don't understand why someone has a faith crisis or disaffiliates or has to reconstruct their faith, if we don't understand that, then we can never minister to them. Mm-hmm. What I mean by minister to them is understand them and be compassionate and build a relationship. And if we just use kind of trite generalizations, which sometimes might be true, but usually aren't, then we actually create more misunderstanding and more pain and difficulty. You've read the book, and so you probably recall this story about Mike. Mm-hmm. I tell about Mike, and Mike's in his 30s and is just having a faith crisis, and he goes for a year without telling his wife. And he feels completely alone. He's praying, he's fasting, he's doing everything that he can, perhaps even in a hyper intense way. to try and kind of work through this in some sort of faithful way. And, the guy's just alone. And there's a term that is often used in faith crisis called the dark night of the soul. And, Mike's night is completely dark and he's completely alone. And, you just feel for him in that. And you get emotional about it because he's suffering and suffering alone, and we don't want anyone to suffer, let alone to suffer alone and isolated and fearful.
As you are collecting data and you're talking to these people with these super tender stories, and you're collecting data from leaders of the church. Just from what you presented at the beginning of the book, I could see like the huge disconnect between the two, which really made me sad. So, all of the leaders said that they would welcome and would want better training on how to talk about these issues, how to help people in their neighborhood or ward or whatever it might be to, just to show empathy and love to them. So, certainly your book does it, and it's a great help. But how do you feel like the church can help those leaders help those in their congregations?
Well, one thing that I found really encouraging on this is that leaders universally recognize that this is a challenge. Mm-hmm. So, I ask them that, is it a problem in your ward? Are you concerned about it in your family? And the answers are yes and double yes. Mm-hmm. I ask even about the prevalence of faith crisis with this group of leaders, and almost all of them have either a family member, a child, or a close friend who has had a faith crisis. So it's just a characteristic of our day, and I think we'll eventually kind of get caught up with kind of the training and the ministerial approaches for responding to people with faith crisis. But I have to go back to my own church service. I was both a bishop and a stake president, and so much of those callings is based on the experience that you've already had. There's a handbook, but the handbook isn't, it trains on some things, but it doesn't train on so many things. Mm-hmm. And so you're really relying upon your experience and your earnestness in terms of trying to look at a problem and engage the Lord in the answers. But for something that is so different today than it was even 20 years ago, many leaders just don't have a lot of experience in terms of approaching this. And so they don't know how to train their bishops or their Relief Society presidents or the members of the quorum or the members of the Relief Society to respond. And, parents may not know themselves about the issues that can trigger a faith crisis, and so it's hard for them to teach their kids. So I think we're kind of in this in-between stage where these issues are prevalent in the church, and we're trying different things, and we're doing the best, and as we do that, we'll get better and better about it. But I don't know what the church generally is kind of approaching this, and what kind of training, if any, they're providing to stakes and wards. The stake and ward leaders that I surveyed weren't feeling like they were getting much. Yeah, they didn't feel very capable to address the issues when I asked them those questions.
Well, something you just said, you mentioned, and of course, none of us would know generally how the church at a high level is going to address some of these issues. Right. I look at how the gospel topics essays, for example, were rolled out in a way that was like it. If you listen to how Elder Snow says that their strategy behind rolling them out, of the church wants to be the author of their own history, and they want to put it out there, but and of course I'm talking just about one of the issues, history being that issue, but they wanted to be the author of that, but not necessarily throw it in someone's face that doesn't need to be thrust into something that could cause a crisis themselves. So I think what you mentioned is striking, because it almost feels like the church doesn't quite, they have to balance between being open and transparent and not pushing people into a crisis where it wouldn't have come anyway if they wouldn't have been the author of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have great sympathy for the complexity of their callings when they respond to this. And, then you add to it the worldwide nature of the church, and, what they say and do has to fit India, Sierra Leone,
right,
the United States, and places I've not traveled and not lived and experienced. So they do have a hard challenge on that. The only, I thought that President Ballard's remarks in February of 2016 to CES instructors was really a very important talk, where he talked about how CES instructors need to know the essays like the back of their hand, and even implied that families need to do that. I think he said that the CES instructors are kind of the second line defense after families on this, which means that parents need to know these issues because their children will face them. At least if they're living in a first world kind of country and setting. So I don't know how that percolates out. I asked the church leaders how familiar they were with the essays, and a surprising number have never heard of them.
Yeah, it's funny. I asked my elders quorum that same question, and two hands in the room went up. Yeah. Me and the stake presidency member that I had asked to be there.
Because you had told him about him probably before the meeting.
Well, I think he knew about him. He actually, that's why I opened up to him, because he gave a talk in a stake conference that showed me that he knew the issues. So I actually ran up to him after, that was the first leader I talked to. I ran up to him after the conference and said, I need 30 minutes. I'm so sorry. Apologize to your wife. Can you talk to me right now? I mean, I was in the depths of crisis, and he did. And so he was an ear for me for a number of months. And then, so that it's funny, because I think a lot of what is striking to me in the book, and hopefully those that are listening to this podcast that are the ones that have experienced or are currently experiencing a crisis, is the book spoke very true to my own experience. Even to the point of echoing a lesson that I taught 2 years ago in Elders Quorum. So if you are on David, you may, I don't know if you'll like the way that we talk about, we don't like to label, but I just, for brevity, I say if you're on the non-believing side, and I know that just because you don't believe in some of the truth claims anymore, you still believe in something. But if you're the one going through crisis, don't be afraid of this book or feel like it's going to be triggering. It absolutely isn't. It's beautiful.
Can I say, I think I really like, David, what you said about like families knowing about the Gospel Topics essay, because in my position where Alan has learned a lot of this information and he comes to me and says, I want you to read this. It's scary for me, especially because I don't know what he's about to present to me. I don't want my own view to change. The ideas I have about the church, I don't really want them to change. And I think reading this book gave me more confidence. Like it gave me a little bit of push in a positive direction that, no, I should be reading the Gospel Topics essays and I should know about them. And that's a really hard thing when my spouse has already read them and is pushing me to read them. And a lot of our listeners are in that same boat where their spouses have gone through this crisis. They want to share. And I know Alan kept saying, but Katie, it's on LDS.org. And I would say, but yeah, I'm just like not there. I'm not ready yet. Do you have any advice for those spouses out there who are in that position, haven't read it yet, and are feeling really, really worried about what they'll read?
Well, I mean, I think everyone kind of has to take that stuff at their own pace. And, I think a generation or two from now, the gospel topic essays will be something that we don't even think about because, we have talked about them and we know about them. And so they're part of our fabric. It seems crazy that an angel would bring gold plates, but that doesn't seem crazy to us because we've kind of grew up with that, and that's a part of our conversion in some ways. And so the issues in the gospel topic essays, I think, become more normalized over time. But when they all come at you at once, and they come at you in a context of these are real issues and they've caused me to reevaluate whether I can believe and stay within the church, then it is very threatening to a believing member. Mm-hmm. So I think the advice I would give is legitimize the concern for the other person. You don't have to understand it completely, and you don't have to kind of match their knowledge on it. Mm-hmm. But as you feel comfortable, then you can gradually or more quickly or immediately, try and understand that issue. And I think that a part of give and take in a relationship is to honor both parties as you go through this. Mm-hmm. The one person that's got a concern and saying, okay, I may not completely understand this, but I know you're a good person and I know you're trying to understand. And so I accept that it's really important and real for you. And I'm just not ready yet to kind of go down that road. Be patient with me. And so I think that's what makes effective relationships, when we can understand each other's viewpoints. And that may be hard with a spouse that's going through a deconstruction of faith, because there's so much emotion associated with that. And in the book, I hope I give some tips and tools to be able to do that. We don't label, we don't blame. We don't say, well, the reason you're doing this is because you haven't been faithful, or because you didn't go to the temple enough, or you need to read your scriptures more, or whatever. But as we kind of accept the reality of what they're going through and being trusting in their goodness, I think it builds a bridge that allows you to remain connected and close together without it being threatening to either. In time.
You feel like that's happened?
Right? Yeah.
That's happened with us?
That's happened with us.
It took a lot of time.
It took time.
It took maturity, I think, on both sides to be able to say, on my side, I just didn't, over time, I felt like it's not important to me anymore to thrust this new information on you, Katie, anymore. And so that need kind of died down. It also died down because I wasn't consuming it anymore. But that period of time, man, when you're going through stuff 6 to 8 hours a day, within a week, your full-time job, 40 hours worth of research beyond what your spouse knows. And that chasm is wide very quickly. And you get home and Katie, I just listened to this podcast. Did you know blah, 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 blah. Or Katie, I just read this article. Did you know blah, 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 blah. And even if you're not trying to sound threatening, it can come off as like, oh my gosh, can you just watch a baseball game? So let's stop talking about this.
So, okay. So we've been through this we're going on 3 years now. And
we say that like we're the total experts.
We're not the total experts. I'm just giving it a frame of reference.
Yeah.
We're going on 3 years, and because we have been patient, opened up, I've listened to his concerns, I've read some of the stuff he's read, I've listened to the podcasts he's listened to. I would be lying if I didn't say that I was more nuanced, right? I realize and recognize some of the issues in the church, and I've become a little bit nuanced. And in the book, you talk about a truth cart, and you bring that up. And so I wanted you to maybe address what truth cart is, and what it means, and how, when I read about it, I couldn't help but think like that sounds like a cafeteria Mormon. So is there a difference between the two, and what is the difference?
Well, I'm not sure I know the answers to those completely, but let's start with what is a truth card. And I didn't invent this. This is
Right.
a construct from Patrick Mason, if I recall right.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that, there's some things that we think we have to believe in order to be able to be faithful members of the church. Do you have to believe that Job is a literal person? Do you have to believe that Jonah was swallowed by the whale? Do you have to believe? And those are pretty simple. And I start out with those because, everyone can say, well, I get that parts of the Old Testament might not be completely literal.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to believe that there's a global flood? Do you have to believe that the earth is 6,000 years old? And some of those things don't really matter when we talk about how to become a better person, how to become more Christ-like, how to make and keep covenants. And so I think sometimes we have so much in our truth card that we end up having to defend everything. And when something falls apart, then everything falls apart. Mm-hmm. So if in our truth card we have a claim, for example, that prophets have never made a mistake, and that, when I say it like that, that seems kind of ridiculous that we would believe that. We know that they are human and are subject to human limitations. Mm-hmm. But then if we kind of still believe that in the fabric and then find something where we with the best evidence, we think they might have made a mistake, then the truth card breaks and everything falls out. If we, can't, if we're so brittle about a particular view that if it is challenged, then everything comes apart. So, people have to decide what's in their truth card. For me, there are things like Jesus Christ, heavenly parents, a plan of salvation, a life after death, of the love that comes from heavenly parents that's embodied in a redemptive plan that allows us to be healed and made complete, free from sin, free from the limitations that this life places on us. And to me, those are the powerful things in the truth card. Mm. And when you start kind of looking at things like that, Job being a literal person, I mean, who gives a rip? Mm. But I can read the story and I can learn things about my relationship to Christ or my responsibility to comfort other people. Job's actually really a good story because, there's kind of a faith crisis going on in the story of Job, right? And his friends start blaming him for, all the bad things that are happening into his life because clearly he was either offended, lazy, or wanted to sin.
That's a good.
Does that answer your question?
So, yeah, no, well, but you've heard the term cafeteria Mormon.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's just our modern day way of saying that?
No, I don't. I think that's, I think cafeteria Mormon is a little bit different. I think that's kind of, I pick and choose, maybe it is the same. I suppose everyone uses it a little bit differently so it's probably hard to pin down a perfect definition on it. I think part of the gospel that is important is that we do take responsibility for our own faith and that we do own it and that we do decide what is important to us and act on that. I suppose some people could call that being cafeteria Mormon. I think at the heart of it is that I think we're safe if our earnest efforts are to become Christ-like. Our earnest efforts are to understand the love of our heavenly parents and to respond to it in kind to those people around us. I think that is at the heart of it. And at times we can can get distracted by things that kind of keep us from that central focus in our lives. So I think it's okay to shed some of those things, whether it's Job or, perhaps even maybe different ways in which we participate in church.
Yeah, I love that.
The first thing that you just mentioned in the truth card in your summary there was focusing on being Christ-like. Do you have any thoughts on someone that does not believe in the divinity of Christ, but still believes in using Christ, or can use Christ as a similar or as a common language, something that if I can model my life around the narrative that I have learned of what it means to be Christ-like, that's how I want to shape my life, even if I don't necessarily believe in the divinity of Christ. Any thoughts on that approach, or did you talk to anyone in the preparation of your book about that topic at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of, that there's some folks that have lost belief in a historical Christ, and they still choose to participate in one way or another because they treat Christ as a concept, and that concept is embodied in the ministry of Christ, where Christ sees suffering, he sees otherness, he sees disease, and he chooses to heal and unite and bring people together. He challenges unfairness. And I do know people that take that view of Christ as a concept and embody that in their life. I think that's wonderful. I also know people that believe in a historical Christ and don't embody those kinds of things.
Right, it can go both ways.
Yeah, I can.
So everything that is embodied either in the historical Jesus or in the concept of Jesus that we apply into our lives makes us better people and makes those around us blessed. So I would hope that people who have left the faith, if you will, retain that concept, even if they don't retain the specific belief. I think that's a fundamental issue in the truth cart, but I can understand people that they can't get there, and they still want to participate in goodness and maybe even formally in church, because they find in the church community an opportunity to express that ideal.
Thank you for saying that. I think this is really important because, David, we talk to hundreds of couples, and some of the more painful ones are the emails or messages that we get are centered around, not all of them, and this isn't the most common issue, but many of them are centered around, he doesn't even believe in God or Christ anymore. And what you just explained, and I don't want to interpret your answer as it's okay not to believe in Christ, because I know that's a very core part of your value system and your beliefs is Christ's divinity. But allowing for space of I can live a Christ-centered life even if I'm not on the 100% belief in Christ and in the traditional LDS narrative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one area we didn't talk about in terms of my own personal story is I do have adult children that don't believe and don't hold traditional Latter-day Saint beliefs. And I'm really proud of them, not because they don't believe like I do, but because they still model in their lives that goodness. And it's important to them to have the ideals that are embodied in Christ in their lives. And it's actually interesting. They actually have taught me things about Christ. It's interesting when you step away from something and start into new beliefs. there are things that I have been able to learn from them about my own beliefs. And so I think as they stepped away initially, I was kind of afraid, maybe in a different way than you're describing, Katie, is kind of asking them the questions. But as I've asked them the questions, I've learned things from them that are good and wonderful, that have made me a better Latter-day Saint, and have to some extent shaped ways in which I use church doctrine to and behavior to bless my life and those lives around me. So I'd love for them to be sitting next to me on a pew on Sunday, but I'm grateful for the goodness that they found in their lives and the way in which they touch other people's lives because of that. I think that is, whether you call it Christ-like or not, that's goodness.
Yeah.
So I love that, especially because a lot of people, at least, it sounds like you have kids that are our age. So you pretend you're the dad, you're our dad. And, we hear so many, hundreds of families whose parents just react, really well and actually really horribly, and are very harsh towards the person going through the crisis of faith. How, for any of the parents out there who are listening, whose son or daughter, how can they be supportive to their, you're talking towards the end of the book about ministering. How can a parent be supportive to their child? How have you been able to find that balance between your faith and your children?
I really like the word ministering, not because it's a new church program. I hope it's not a church program, but because what the word really means is very powerful and pastoral. Ministering requires a deep understanding of people's needs. And because of that understanding, we're able to provide comfort and love and the things that they need, right? And we in the church do that pretty well in some contexts when there's, just before this meeting, for example, I got a sign-up genius from my elders quorum president saying, we need to do a move on Saturday. Can you do it? And so I sign up, and there's a need, and you respond to it, and it's easy to do. It's not easy. I'm old, and my bones don't work quite as well as they used to, but I still can do a little bit, and we love that. It's harder for us when it gets to issues of differences of faith on knowing how to minister, and parents. My counsel with them would be to take that word and really understand what it means, and to gain a deep understanding of your adult child. Primarily, I'm talking about adult children in the book, and reach out to them in a way that gives you understanding and allows you to comfort and love them and to mourn with them. There's something that I really was surprised about with the research is how painful it is for someone to go through a faith crisis and ultimately leave belief behind. It's a part of their life, and it's like it's gone now, and it needs to be mourned. It certainly is felt that way as a loss, and and it's traumatic. And I think parents need to be less concerned about kind of the eternal complications of that, or the eternal kind of doctrinal implications of that, and more concerned with the here and the now, and how do I put my arm around a child who's, struggling to believe or has deep philosophical disagreements with church doctrine or policy, and how can I show the kind of love that the Savior had when, I can't quite remember the story, but it's, the Savior says to someone, do you believe? And he says, yea, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. And the Lord was able to minister to someone who didn't have belief. And I think we can do the same. That sounded really preachy, didn't it?
Oh, I liked it.
No, it's perfect. It makes me, I just reflect so much on, those who are listening and the stories we've heard. And I just hope that there are parents out there listening to this and that will read the book, because I felt very encouraged after I read your book, and it gives me a lot of hope for the future in the church. But I feel like it sheds a light on a topic that is just not really talked about in our congregations and at church, and that can be a really hard thing. And it's a lonely place, not only for those who go through the crisis, but it's a very lonely place for people like me. You know, I mean, we've talked about our story before, but I felt so much pain and loneliness, not knowing who to turn to, not knowing who could empathize with me, not knowing, having, feeling like I had this giant secret on my chest that I couldn't share with anyone. And, I feel like so many of our listeners are in that position where they're just the supporting role, and they have no idea how to navigate that. And so your words bring a lot of comfort, and not only I can see from the parent's point of view, but for the spouse as well.
We should have had a chapter in the book about, implications in a marriage on this. It didn't come up as an overriding theme, but it is there.
Yeah.
And I appreciate being introduced to you two to understand some of those complexities and how you've navigated that. And maybe you two need to write that chapter of
the second edition.
For the second
edition here.
This is what you just said, Katie, is big, and you and I have talked, I don't think on camera about this before, but a part in that chapter would be, I think there's a wake-up call with mixed faith marriage to the church in how it's handled at the local level. And not to say, and I'm not implying that our local leaders have done anything wrong, because they haven't. They've been phenomenal.
Yeah.
But what we have seen from a number of our listeners is if the spouse that remains, quote, in the church, the way that Sundays go currently, and that is not at all part of someone's participation in the church, but it's a huge part of someone's participation in the church. Pretty quickly, they feel like they don't fit anymore. And they haven't shifted any belief whatsoever. Sometimes they haven't read anything or learned anything, and they don't feel the same way. And what an isolating feeling for that spouse to feel like, I don't belong anymore. And maybe they don't agree with some of the things that are being said about their spouse or people in the same position as their spouse. So a lot of the times where both spouses end up leaving, it actually doesn't have to do with the trailing spouse shifting their beliefs. It's this I don't belong here anymore. I don't fit the nuclear family that the church wants me to fit anymore, and it just becomes unbearable. That's not the case for everybody, but that's something that and I'd love to transition into talking about that last section in more detail about ministering, but I think that's something that the church would benefit from incorporating a lot of the ideas in your ministering section. Is these mixed faith couples won't feel so isolated anymore. I truly can support Katie, and I know this is a big monologue, but I truly can support Katie in her continued participation and belief in the church. I truly can. I've seen moments where it gets very difficult for her.
Father's Day, we didn't go. Alan, I said, what do you want to do for Father's Day? And he didn't want to go to church, and I get it. That's not how he wanted to spend his Father's Day, but all the kids are standing up in front singing to their dads, and
you didn't want to see that. So they can sing to me at home, right?
I think we ended up going the second hour, but it's just painful. It's too painful.
Yeah, it's tough.
I'd love for us at church to be able to kind of remove that difficulty. Maybe it's impossible. I'm kind of realistic about kind of the culture that exists there and how hard it is to kind of remove that. One of the one of the things that I felt with the research that I did was that a core reason for disaffiliation is for people feeling like they don't belong. And that non-belonging can come from so many different ways, but what you've expressed, Katie, is right in there. And that is actually an issue that I'm familiar with personally on that. Yeah. And I would love for us to find ways where the diversity that does exist in the church, mixed-faith marriages, divorce, mental illness, sexual orientation, race, culture, economics. I think we could go on for a long time on this list, where those differences wash away, because when we think about Christ and his ministry was all about removing otherness. You know, there aren't others. We are all our heavenly parents' children. And I think that's what his ministry was all about, was to help us understand that, so that we could love God and our neighbor. And our neighbor was the Samaritan. Our neighbor was whoever that other person was. The woman with an issue of blood, the leper, the woman taken in adultery. That's what it means to minister, is to comprehend people and their real needs, and to be able to see people like Katie that are trying to make it work and find ways so that she doesn't feel. I mean, if we aren't able to have people feel like they belong to a religious community that preaches the beliefs that we have, then we as a church community have really failed.
So let's focus on Sunday attendance. We recently did 7 episodes, 4 by us, 3 by Lindsay and Matt Kerr, on going back to church. So I hadn't gone for about 8 months, and I went back for 4 consecutive weeks, and we kind of recorded our experience on that. What does this look like? What you just explained, what does it look like? And I know that there's not some if everyone does these 5 steps in the wards, that even the lowliest of non-believers can feel comfortable. But let's brainstorm. Let's solve the issue here live on Marriage on a Tightrope. What are some things what does that Sunday experience look like at church that would be easier for someone in my position or in Katie's position to feel more comfortable and like they belong?
Well, I think we have to acknowledge the diversity of belief within our congregations. I suspect in your congregation and in my congregation that there are people that go to church and say, I don't think I believe this, and no one knows it. And they might be even sitting on the stand, or they might be giving the church talk or teaching the lesson. And so I think we, just like you mentioned, Alan, that stake presidency member that spoke in a way that you knew he knew about challenges of faith, I think we have to give those clues. I think we have to find ways formally to acknowledge that there is the diversity of belief and human experience in our congregation. And we do that by using diverse topics in our lessons and in our sacrament meetings. We use diverse speakers. I would love for someone like you, if I were a bishop, I'd want to reach out to you and say, is there something you could say in sacrament meeting? And you don't have to testify about the divinity of Christ, but is there some way to engage you in that, so that even when you are fully acknowledging the level of belief you have, that you feel like you can participate in the community? And so I think we need to find more ways to be able to do that and to engage people. Maybe some people feel like if we do that, we, are diminishing kind of the spiritual power of the people participating, because we have some people that are participating without full belief. But I think that's what the church is all about, is reaching people where they are and finding ways that they can participate and help and bless other lives.
Now Alan's getting emotional.
So I kind of choked up when when you said if I was in your congregation, you would want to ask me to come up, and just the fact that you said that, I don't know that I want that anymore, but I wanted that for a long time. And as soon as, and I'm talking, you've heard similar stories, David, but I'm really talking to those that are newer in this journey, that have gone through a crisis of faith, because I've been through it. It is so isolating. It's so isolating as soon as it's known that. Sorry, I shouldn't say this like it happens in every single person's experience, but in my experience, as soon as it is is known the depths of my crisis or disbelief, I'm no longer a safe person to have participate. And I would have loved to still participate. And now I think it's just too far gone. It's for local participation, at least. It's just too far gone.
It's too far gone because you feel like you're not in the headspace, like you don't have the desire to do so, or because you don't think that they would even ask you.
I don't think they want it. I don't think that's what they want. That's one thing that when I read your book was actually a little difficult for me. Was I was reading it, especially that last section on ministering, and it was a little disheartening to me because I thought, yeah, this would be amazing. This would be amazing, but I don't know if it's going to get there, and I don't know. It can't come soon enough, and I don't know. It was this odd mixture of this is amazing and darn it, why couldn't this have been my experience?
Yeah, I hear you, and I don't know how wide the gap is, and if it does close, or how much time it closes. If you noticed in the book, I really didn't talk about global church issues. I really didn't talk about much of what happens in the church office building. I really talked about what happens in our wards and in our families. And we have such wide opportunity to be able to make changes there that can make it easier. Not that maybe our goal should be to try and retain people. I can't quite figure that out. But more than that, it's about loving people. It's about being with them. It's about being open to the journey and the painfulness of what they probably are experiencing. And I would hope we can get better at that. We're people. And so it's hard for us to do this. And we react in all sorts of different ways. But I hope in time that we can be better. And if we can be better, I think we're, meaning if we're better at trying to reach out to people like you, Alan, in the initial stages or even where you are now, we become better people. Those that, hold traditional views, we become better people because we all can learn from each other. And in that openness of ourselves, we learn things about ourselves.
I think what I love most, and I don't think I've said that yet, so I know in interviews you hate when I say my favorite part of the book was, and you say that 8 times, but I think what I love most is from my side of the fence, not that I'm trying to build a gap here, but is I truly don't feel like you have any intention other than understanding and loving. And that approach is absolutely what so many people in this situation that Katie and I find ourselves in, just that's what we crave. We crave feeling like someone cares and understands and loves. And I'm not whining saying that nobody does, because we've had a number of people in the ward exhibit those exact qualities, which has been phenomenal. But that is what we crave, without any pretension of, oh, they're just being a friend because they just want us to come back to church, or they're just being nice because they were assigned to be nice, or anything like that. So that's my favorite part of the approach that you take, is it truly is coming from a place of, my goal isn't to get you to come back or even to get you to stay. If you do and it's helpful for you, great. But I just want to understand what you're going through. So I'd really appreciate that approach.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, David. So when are you going on your speaking tour?
Well, we want to book you in Murray,
Can
Utah.
we set you up with and invite all of our local leaders? And I'm half joking, half being serious, because I feel like, all of this is just so. I want to buy just a pallet of books and give it away to all of my neighbors and friends and loved ones for Christmas, because I just feel like this conversation needs to happen, and it needs to happen sooner rather than later. What are you doing in your area now? What are you doing with your local leaders to help them understand and learn? And I mean, what can we do in our own homes and stakes?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. And I'm really humbled that you would say what you are saying about the book. I never expected to write a book. I never expected to write a good book. But I'm really grateful that it has touched you. And I know it's touched others because they've reached out to me and expressed that. And I think that we are better at embracing these kinds of concepts when we're in the middle of a situation where the needs are apparent. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes the problem of if it's a problem, let's not call it a problem, that sometimes because the current issues of disaffiliation don't slap us in the face all the time, we don't think about this as a problem. Mm. And so we don't know what we could do. So many of the people that have a faith crisis won't disclose where they are for the very reasons, Alan, you mentioned. It changes everything once you disclose it. Might even affect your job, affects your friends, your family relationships. Your wife might get released from a calling just because you as a husband, are struggling with faith. And so we have all these people that are, I don't know how many, but I know that there's lots that are kind of silently going through this process. And so I would hope that that leaders can feel comfortable that, number one, they need to address it, and number two, that they can address it. I was really humbled by an endorsement that Patrick Mason, who wrote the book Planted, which is really a great book here, he said that this book needs to be, I think he said something like, a dog-eared copy needs to be in the home of every ward council member. And I would hope that it does permeate those kinds of discussions. I don't claim to have all the answers. I hope I provoke enough so that leaders, I'm not one of these leaders, I'm not a bishop, I'm not a stake president, but I hope that the words that I put forward here will provoke them to think deeply about this and to come up with ideas and solutions in their wards and stakes that do respond to the needs that I think they know are there, but probably just don't know how to address it. So am I doing a speaking tour? Not really.
What? Got stuff going on?
I have grandkids. But, I'm happy to help out in any way that could be there. I do operate a Facebook group for parents.
Oh, great.
Whose children, whose adult children no longer are believers. And the issues that you described previously are felt there very much by parents. They feel perhaps like their whole eternal future is some sort of sad heaven, as you know that term. Mm-hmm. So I'm hopeful that there are ways that I can contribute, but I think most of the work is going to happen kind of in these interpersonal situations where people talk to their spouse or talk to their parents or their leaders and introduce these ideas. And, perhaps the book can be a part of that. As you mentioned, Katie, having a leader read this could be helpful. I know some people have said, Bishop, if you want to minister to me around my faith crisis, you need to read a book first. And so I know that there's some of that goes on. And but I'm hopeful that because of the overarching goodness of the people in the church, I've really found good people, that we will become better at this. And our leaders will find ways to respond, probably better than anything I've written about.
Well, we just so appreciate your work and your effort. And I mean, I can feel it. I can feel how sincere you are. And I hope that comes across in this interview, because I definitely feel it. And, down the road one day, if you decide that you want to collaborate with us to help out our mixed faith marriages, we are plugged into that community really well. And that's something I think that would be so beneficial, so that we don't lose some of these people like me who want to be supportive of their spouse, but who also still has a deep love and for their community and church. So,
well, thank you. I'd love to do that. So, maybe I'll get out to Salt Lake one of these days and we can have a chat. Figure it out.
Yeah.
That'd be great. You know what? Impromptu, Katie, I hope this is okay. We're going to give away 3 copies of the book. 5 copies of the book. We're
giving away 5 copies of the book.
So if you would like a copy of Bridges Ministering to Those Who Question, send us an email at marriageonatightrope@gmail.com, and we will, on our next episode, no, we can't announce who's going to win on the episode, but we will let those know that win.
Maybe through Instagram or Facebook.
Or via email. But if you would like to receive a copy of that book, just send us an email, and we will give those out to you. First 5 people.
Right. And you can find the book where, David?
Well, it's now just being made available at Deseret Book. So I'm excited about that. I made it.
At the top of the chain.
And Amazon, and then at Koford Books.
Perfect.
And we're just finalizing the audio version of it.
Oh, nice.
So I know my voice is kind of grating, and I'm apologizing in advance for that audio version, but you get what you get. And that's my voice.
It's not grating at all.
No, that'll be great.
That's great. Well, any parting words? We'll give you the last word to all of our listeners here on the Tightrope.
I wish I could come up with something profound. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts. My marriage is not on a tightrope, but I really appreciate what you're doing. I know a number of people in this situation, and everything I know about you and the way in which you're approaching these issues is just wonderful. So thank you for your work, and let's figure out how to write that next chapter.
Great.
Sounds great. Well, this is one big kumbaya session.
Yeah.
David,
should we sing a closing song or something?
Yeah. What's the closing hymn?
Kumbaya.
That's the one. David Ostler, thank you so much for joining us here on Marriage on a Tightrope. This has been Alan and Katie. If you would like to contact us, you already know the email. You can also join us on Facebook at Marriage on a Tightrope and on Instagram by the same name.
David, do you want to plug? Do you have a Facebook group? Do you want to say that again?
Yeah. What's the name of that Facebook group?
Well, it's something like Bridges Support for LDS Parents Whose Adult Children, something like that. I can put it in the notes.
Great.
And then there's a website that the book has called bridgeslds.com.
Wonderful.
And if people want to contact you, how can they do that?
On the I'll just give my email address. I'm going to read it anyway. You can go to the website and do message me, or you can do B as in boy, Ostler @gmail.com.
OSTLER. Awesome.
David, thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you, folks.